Imagine a massive, completely silent monument holding the absolute key to an entire civilization, a key that was literally lost for centuries. Today, we're unpacking the incredible true story of a legendary linguistic mystery. We're talking about a frantic military heist, an intense academic rivalry, and the ultimate decoding of a lost world. Welcome to The Explainer.
To really appreciate this story, we've got to grasp the sheer scale of the blackout. By the 4th century AD, the ability to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs had just completely vanished. The last known inscription was actually carved at the Temple of Philae in the year 394 AD, and after that, total silence. As the temple priesthoods died out and Egypt converted to Christianity, the monumental use of hieroglyphs just ceased entirely. So for 1,400 years, the grand temples, the sweeping tombs, all those magnificent monuments of ancient Egypt stood completely mute. Countless scholars across the medieval and early modern periods tried to crack the code, right? But the pictorial appearance of the glyphs constantly misled them. The voice of an entire civilization was totally inaccessible.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because this is exactly the staggering question facing scholars at the dawn of the 19th century. Think about it. How do you even begin to reconstruct a language when there's no living speaker, no dictionary, and no surviving grammatical guide? It's honestly like trying to understand an alien broadcast. The secret to cracking a cold case of this magnitude requires a bridge, a translation from the unknown into the known. And that bridge was miraculously uncovered in a single shattered piece of stone that would literally change the course of history forever.
So that bridge turned out to be a decree issued way back in 1960 BC, during the reign of King Ptolemy V, who, by the way, was just a 12-year-old boy at the time. Basically, a congress of priests gathered in Memphis and created a stela inscribed in 3 distinct scripts. The top section was written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, which the decree itself explicitly calls the language of the gods. The middle section was in Demotic, the everyday language of documents used by the Egyptian public, and in the bottom section was written in ancient Greek, which was the administrative language of the ruling Ptolemaic government. Crucially, the decree contained only minor differences across the 3 versions. This trilingual format was purposefully intended to ensure that all levels of society, from the divine right down to the bureaucratic, could read the king's decree.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the physical reality of the stone itself. It is a massive 1,680-pound slab of granodiorite, which is this dark, coarse-grained rock. But for a really long time, it was actually mistakenly identified as black basalt. Why? Well, because after it arrived in London, well-meaning museum staff rubbed it with white chalk to make the text pop, and then they coated the whole thing in carnauba wax to protect it from the fingers of curious visitors. It wasn't actually until a cleaning in 1999 that its true dark gray, sparkling crystalline structure, complete with this really distinctive pink vein, was fully revealed. But honestly, just as fascinating is where this giant rock has been. It started in an ancient temple, possibly at Sais, but as temples were later dismantled for building materials, this absolutely priceless artifact ended up being used as foundation rubble in a fortress constructed by a Mamluk sultan in the 15th century. Crazy, right?
Let's move forward and see how this builds, because the modern rediscovery of the stone reads exactly like a military thriller. In 1798, Napoleon invaded Egypt, and he brought along a corps of 151 technical experts and scholars. Fast forward to July 1799, a French lieutenant named Pierre-François Bouchard was strengthening the defenses of Fort Julien near the town of Rosetta, when his soldiers uncovered the inscribed slab right there in a demolished wall. But the French just couldn't hold on to it. In August 1801, the British defeated the French in Alexandria. General Menou of the French forces tried to claim the stone as his personal property, but the British surrounded them. By February 1802, the stone was loaded onto the captured French frigate HMS Egyptian and shipped off to England.
And as you can imagine, the handover of this artifact was incredibly tense. When the British arrived to claim the antiquities as property of the British Crown, French scholars were absolutely furious. In fact, French scholar Etienne Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire ominously threatened that the French would rather burn all their precious discoveries than hand them over to the British. He was drawing a direct, pretty chilling comparison to the burning of the ancient Library of Alexandria. British scholars like Edward Daniel Clarke searched the French baggage, noting, "We found much more in their possession than was represented or imagined." According to some accounts, the Rosetta Stone was actually found secretly hidden under protective carpets in the French general's residence before it was finally seized and presented to King George III.
So, the crucial point is how this object actually worked as a decryption key. It wasn't magic, it was a grueling, multi-step process of picking a linguistic lock. Step 1. Scholars read the ancient Greek text at the bottom. Since Greek was widely understood, it gave them the exact meaning of the decree. Step 2, they started matching proper names from the Greek text, like Ptolemy and Alexander, to the Middle Demotic script, realizing for the very first time that this script used phonetic characters. And then step 3, definitely the hardest part, they took those names and looked for them in the highly damaged hieroglyphic text at the top. Earlier scholars had guessed that the oval rings, known as cartouches, contained royal names. By looking at those specific rings, they finally started to crack the phonetic alphabet of the pharaohs. This incredibly complex decipherment sparked one of history's great academic rivalries. On one side, you have the brilliant British polymath Thomas Young. Back in 1814, Young discovered the phonetic characters for the name Ptolemy and the hieroglyphs, and he correctly deduced that the Demotic script was a mix of phonetic and ideographic signs. But on the other side, you have the French prodigy Jean-François Champollion. Champollion took Young's foundational clues, analyzed additional texts like the Philae obelisk, and constructed a full phonetic hieroglyphic alphabet, announcing his monumental breakthrough in 1822. The rivalry was fierce. British critics even accused Champollion of plagiarizing Young's work. But even though tensions ran incredibly high, both men provided the essential leaps of genius required to finally solve the riddle of the Sphinx.
Now here is the great, slightly humorous climax of this entire saga. After decades of military bloodshed, international diplomatic standoffs, and a frantic race between Europe's greatest geniuses to read the profound, mythical language of the gods, what did the Rosetta Stone actually say? Well, it essentially boils down to a massive tax break and political propaganda. The decree was just a PR move by the priesthood to secure the reign of a young king Ptolemy V. It granted tax immunity, offered gifts of silver and grain to the temples, and demanded that everyone celebrate the king's birthday. The key to unlocking an entire ancient civilization was, at its core, a bureaucratic administrative memo.
And this brilliantly illustrates why the stone's legacy extends far, far beyond ancient Egypt. Its cultural footprint is so massive that the term Rosetta Stone has become the universal idiom for any crucial key that unlocks a new field of knowledge. In modern physics, the spectrum of the hydrogen atom is called the Rosetta Stone of the universe. In medicine, understanding the human leukocyte antigen is dubbed the Rosetta Stone of immunology. And in space exploration, the European Space Agency literally named their spacecraft Rosetta when they launched it to study a comet, hoping it would unlock the mysteries of the origins of our solar system.
But the story of the Rosetta Stone is far from over, and its current status is the subject of intense, ongoing debate. The artifact has been housed in the British Museum almost continuously since 1802. However, since 2003, prominent Egyptian officials, notably Dr. Zahi Hawass, have strongly requested that the stone be repatriated to Egypt, arguing that it is the ultimate icon of Egyptian identity. Conversely, the British Museum, along with dozens of other major international institutions, issued a joint statement in 2002 defending their retention of such artifacts. They stated that museums serve not just the citizens of one nation, but the people of every nation, framing the stone as a piece of shared global heritage. It's a deeply complex issue of modern cultural diplomacy.
Which leaves us with a profound final thought. The Rosetta Stone survived the collapse of an empire, spent centuries buried in the foundations of a medieval fort, sparked a war between European empires, and finally resurrected a forgotten 1400-year-old language. It is a true testament to humanity's deep desire to communicate and understand the past. But as it sits behind glass today, continuing to draw millions of visitors, we have to ask ourselves, as the world changes and our views on cultural heritage evolve, who ultimately owns history? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.